But I thought we would start off with sort of the initial overview of the pre-K expansion grant, and sort of give us the general overview of how you think this might intersect with Act 166 implementation, and then we'll go from there. We're in uncharted territory
So
here.
I'll start a little bit, and then I'm sure Manuel will have more to add to that. Here's how I view this. I think that Act 166 implementation certainly impacts our pre-K expansion grant. Pre-K expansion grant really should not impact Act 166 implementation. Act 166 implementation is a state law, and we will be implementing it as we have been directed to do by our legislature. So the pre-K expansion grants, I do believe it acted in our favor that we could say in our expansion grant that we had just passed this law and that we were moving to this universality. We had a very high score, and I think that was part of it. What the grant does, it's a highly prescriptive federal grant. So in the grant, they set out a list of quality criteria that the feds have decided they want to try out. It's a 4-year grant. It's actually a 1-year grant with year-to-year renewals for up to 4 years. And so those quality criteria are very interesting. It's how advocates work at the federal level as well. Combination of the near kind of quality standards and Head Start standards.
The National Institute for Early Education Research.
So they've put out some, it's not the same as theirs. It uses some of theirs. It also adds in a bunch of stuff from Head Start. So it's a really interesting mix, but it's a very prescriptive list. It requires what they consider to be full-time pre-K, which is the same amount of time that kids go to regular school. So these have to be full-day programs for the entire school, for the school calendar. They require a qualified licensed teacher in every classroom. They require comprehensive type services like nutrition and family support and other kinds of stuff similar to what Head Start offers. So that's another piece of that. They require, what am I missing, Manuel, of the quality standards as I'm rolling down the list?
Well, they also require comparable compensation regardless of setting.
That's a big one. Compensation to those teachers comparable. How did I forget that one? Because I think it's like such a crazy thing to throw in there. Again, advocacy at a national level.
They also require an evidence-based curriculum.
Yes.
So it's not just whatever. It has to be evidence-based curriculum.
Health and safety standards. Now, the good news is that we have really ramped up our health and safety standards in the new licensing regulations. And so a lot of that we've covered because all programs must be regulated, and we have gotten to that place. But so there's this list of those quality criteria that every program must meet. And also, this is limited to 4-year-old children under 200% of poverty. So it's not everybody. So there's a complexity to the combination of the law and the pre-K expansion grant that must be respected. And so what we did in our application is you had to have at least one school district to apply. This has also, I think, helped us a little bit. So, if you're Chicago or Los Angeles, you'd have one. We had 28. That's pretty good, I think. We also had every single, and again, kudos to our Head Start grantees. Every single Head Start grantee in the state stepped up and agreed to partner as well. So I think that all those things strengthened our application very much, and we have a goal that 70% of those 4-year-olds under 200% of poverty will be served in these full-day high-quality programs by the end of our 4-year grant period. That is significant. Some of those are what they call new slots, meaning slots that were not formerly funded publicly by the state or Head Start. Some of them are what they call improved slots. Slots that were funded previously but were less time, less teacher qualifications, less comprehensive, less something. So we have this very complex mix of what our outcomes are. But again, the complexity of the grant is such that, of course, when Act 66 is going to implement that, but it's quite different than the Act. And so we need to get the Act moving forward for all of our kids, even while we do this. And here's our really great opportunity, is that We did ask for in the grant. We have a project manager that AOE will be hiring, so we'll have somebody, you know, like Julie Colorado Staub, whose name I always mess up, who's CS, who's running our Early Learning Challenge grant, who will be really rolling this grant forward with these 29 different school partners and our Head Start grantees as well. And we put in money for a fiscal person to both help with all the contracting and stuff, but also to help us figure out all this blended funding. So, you know, you got a lot of funding streams here. You got a federal Head Start funding stream. We have our state education fund. When we start to talk about full day services, CCFAP comes into play in a completely different way than it does in a 10-hour program. And we've got Title I funding. So there's a lot of funding streams. And one of our goals that we expressed was that we really dig into that and understand how we legally blend these to create the services that we want for kids. Whether or not that matches what the feds say in this grant at the end of 4 years, or whether we decide what matters and what we can fund and figure that out. So to me, the Pre-K expansion grant is this tremendous opportunity to, while we're rolling out Act 166, figure out where we want to go next, and how we pay for that and how we get there with some resources from outside of our pot. So I think it's a great opportunity, but if we learned nothing from the Early Learning Challenge, we learned that besides the rules process taking a long time in the state of Vermont, we don't get federal funds without the legislature telling us we can. So it takes a little time just to loosen up the money. And then it takes a while to ramp things up and get them going. So though we're doing a lot of ramping up, when we have to show services beginning are September of 2015. So we'll be ramping up until that time. The partner regions will be, that's not everything that's going to happen in the 4 years. They'll be beginning in September of 15. We have a sort of a conservative number of slots promised for that year, and they grow with each ensuing year. So, Manuela, that's all I'll say for now.
Okay, so I think that what is really crystal clear is that this is a funding stream, and the funds are only supposed to be spent on children who fit the eligibility, which is as Reva was saying, that it needed to be children who are at or below 200% poverty and who are 4-year-olds. So just that 1 year. So that is one of the very different ways. Now, for some states, because they actually have state-funded pre-K programs that are just for children who are 200% poverty and so on, and they have separate settings for these children and one funding stream for those children, they will have an easier time implementing this. We have a very, as you know, very much more egalitarian approach. Our universal pre-K, it is not income-based. It will be, when it's fully up, it will be for everyone, regardless of income. So we have a little bit of more of a difficulty in terms of how this is actually going to work to enhance what we are currently doing in many of our places, and also provide greater access to some kids that we've had some challenges getting into our programs. When this was first announced back last spring, I think it was, this grant opportunity, I thought it was a wonderful opportunity because what it will enable us to do is, although we're not talking about the entire state, we are talking about a significant number of children and a significant number of programs. It will enable us to pilot some of these best practices in a way that will basically field test them for Vermont and provide us lessons to be learned about how, what works and what doesn't, what is beneficial to kids and families and what isn't, and then be able to use that information as we think about all of our programs and not just those who have stepped up and want to be sub-grantees. So we, as Reva was saying, we have 28 school districts who stepped forward. They wrote an MOU saying that they would be sub-grantees. We also had all 7 of our Head Start programs agreeing and writing an MOU as well. there may be funding. Well, some of those some of those school districts may decide that perhaps this isn't the right time for them to move forward. And also there may be enough funding to actually get some additional school districts, even if they didn't step up right away. So since we're in this area, I'll say that Burlington is one of those that did do an MOU, but I don't have the list off my mind. It is in the grant, which is posted. Right now it's posted on the governor's website, and it lists all of the school districts and who are going to be subgrantees. So what will happen is that essentially the Agency of Education will negotiate with each of the subgrantees, grant that money, which is for tuition, but also for things like comparable compensation for the pre-K teacher. It's also for things like professional development and other kinds of funding for enhancements, as well as the tuition payments for those schools. The specifics of that is still to be worked out. Usually what happens is that after an announcement is made that states have gotten a particular federal grant. Did I say something to upset you? After we have, is that we then have to wait for the feds. We have to wait for our state to go ahead and accept the grant, which always seemed to me kind of silly, that why wouldn't you accept money? But we also have to wait for the feds, and right now we haven't gotten any further details about how they want us to move forward. So we're waiting on that. That's why there's not really a lot of information at this moment, except for generally what our understanding was and what we included in our grant. We'll get more specifications, I'm sure, from the feds, and we will certainly create a spot on our respective agencies' websites so that you can also be kept abreast of these things as well. But we don't have a lot of marching orders. We haven't received any marching orders from the feds yet. Just the good news that we won the grant, and we were third in the ratings.
We were third in the ratings.
How many states was it?
18 were successful. So not only were we successful, we had a good grant, and a lot of it is also because of our passage of Act 166 and our ability to say that X number of dollars based on the $3,000 per child and the number of kids we anticipate enrolling was going to be part of the mix. So the feds have real strong rules about supplanting, so that the state dollars have to be there. That's why this is not how
Right.
we're going to pay for the Act 166. The state dollars have to be there, and then the federal dollars can supplement what the state dollars are providing for those kids. So that's why this is not the way that we're going to fund Act 166, but it will be the way that we're going to fund for that segment of kids, 4-year-olds or above or below 200% poverty, that we're going to fund them a full school year time, high quality program, and also provide the kind of support that's needed for all programs, whether they're school-based, whether they're Head Start programs, or whether they're community-based programs, to be able to provide those services and the requirement for high quality staffing as well as programming.
And I know lots of people, even when we were working on Act 166, thank you, everyone who supplied water. It was nothing she said. I just had a really bad cough, and I didn't want to project that to all of you. Is that lots of people talked about our dosage, our 10 hours, as an insufficient. I totally, absolutely agree that 10 hours is, for many children, an insufficient dose. For some children, in a very enriched home, it may be an absolutely fine dose. But at the same time, we do worry that it's not an adequate dose for many children who could use more enrichment. And so this is a great opportunity for us to look at that and to figure out how we blend funding streams, to figure out what our adequate dose is. And then by the time we get to the end of this, figure that out together and have some good ideas. So I think it's just a great opportunity. And again, though, to look at the questions, the grant does not really affect Act 166 implementation. So people who are who are working on getting Act 166 to work, particularly when you're dealing with early implementation or juggling as a private partner early implementation and non-early implementation. There should be a very clear focus on that so that we can get that moving and do it right. It doesn't affect pre-K regions. It doesn't affect any of those things. Those things are going to move forward. And one of the things I would say to you about the second question about partnerships is what was very impressive to us as we went out and recruited the school districts is many of them were thinking as much, if not more, about expanding in their partnerships as they were expanding in their own school programs. So there's a really strong mix of that in the application, which I think is also impressive. And what's kind of fun in Vermont is, because we are Vermont and we're not Los Angeles or Chicago, we were able to take this statewide approach and talk about this in a way that I think few other states had a capacity to do. So it's, you do become this sort of petri dish, for lack of a better word, for what might work. And so it's just can be a really fun opportunity for folks. I know lots of folks, when you see the list of our brave partners who came out and signed on to these MOUs, which, let me tell you, just went so fast. It was shocking to me that 29 school districts signed on, 28 signed on. That everybody was willing to, could get all their signatures and sign on and take this risk with us and give us numbers. I mean, they were giving us numbers of kids for each of the 4 years. Like it was great what the partners did. And what we're looking at, we did pad all of our numbers with a little bit of extra, because our goal is then to look around the state and say, where are we really serving all of the 4-year-olds under 200% of poverty that we can reach, and where do we really not have that opportunity? And we'll probably be reaching out to places and saying, hey, we don't have anything going on in your region. Will you come in and partner with us? That's what we're thinking right now. So I would say some of our partners are chafing at the bit right now, and we're going, wait a minute, we got hiring to do. So we are going to start with regional meetings to just bring some broad information, and then once we get our project manager hired, there'll be individual partner by partner meetings as we roll that out, and we will have a whole communication plan. But right now, we got to get the money, and we got to hear from the feds, and neither of those things have happened.
So this is Cynthia, and I think that the two questions that were on the board from some phone members have sort of been answered. So I just want to reiterate. So Frank had asked the question, can districts who are not currently under an MOU, could they be considered later on? And it sounds like yes, there's some
Yes,
capacity to
later
look
on.
at later on, not right out of the
Not
gate,
today.
but additional districts, school districts could be part of this. So thank you for that clarification. And then the other question I had came from Heidi, and she was asking the question about if school districts couldn't expand their programs via Act 166 for whatever reason right now, would the expansion grant, under, it sounds like, the very specific guidelines of the children that needed to be served, et cetera, could the expansion grant be an opportunity to expand either student slots or teachers, or bring teacher level funding up? And I think I heard that might be a possibility. Is that true?
I don't think that we've actually had that conversation
Okay.
around that piece of it. I have heard from some programs that were concerned because of expansion as a consequence of wanting to move to full day, which, if they don't change the number of slots or teachers, actually isn't expansion under the definition.
Okay.
But there are some other programs which I have heard from who are what would be really expansion under Act 166. We haven't had those conversations in terms of what that nexus is going to be between Act 166 and the expansion grant. And part of it is that the expansion grant, I mean, the announcement came in December, and then there were all the holidays and so on, and we really haven't had a moment, and we haven't also had a lot of additional information to begin to operationalize all of this. Not only is it that we'll be looking for a highly qualified person, this is your a recruitment announcement here.
Anyone?
to
demanding but
grab
fun
hold of
job.
this. Yes, with wonderful people as
Wonderful
colleagues.
You need a purple sweater.
Oh yeah,
You'd have to wear the
I
uniform.
didn't even notice
I didn't
that.
either. I'm noticing Marcia.
I was trying to be like.
Barbara too. Luann, a little bright, but that could be good.
Okay, so basically, I don't think we've actually gotten out of the gate
That's
at
fine.
all with
That's
the
fair.
preschool.
Though I do want to
expansion
say,
grant.
as Manuela said, we cannot supplant Act 166. So they cannot use these funds to implement an as-if 166.
Right.
I do think, I'm going to say this, and I think this is true. You don't have to be an early implementer of 166 to operationalize the grant, because remember, the grant's not universal. And that's the other thing that I think very few people, you hear this and it sounds so exciting. 4-year-olds under 200% of poverty. Literally, the guidance from the feds when we started asking them questions. Again, our partners were phenomenal when we told them these answers, is that if you had it, because we of course have a goal that our kids are a socioeconomic mix, so that means we're going to have classrooms where some of the kids, we're going to ramp up these quality standards for all of the kids, and some of the kids are supported by this grant and others aren't. So we asked the feds the question of, you wouldn't really make us prorate the teacher's salary or something, would you? And they went, oh yes.
Yes, we would.
Well, actually, they did not answer that question online. They went and huddled for 3 days and came back and went, yes, I believe you'll have to prorate. But to me, that says we asked a question that they couldn't answer because they hadn't thought of it already. And to me, there's a good possibility that'll turn around later on. So they're scrambling like we're scrambling with Act 166 to figure out the final rules and implementation of this grant. This is a new one, unlike the Early Learning Challenge where we were the third round of grantees. So they've been through 2 rounds of grantees and sort of had their feet under them. This is brandy new. They got it out there, they gave out the awards, and now they got to figure out how the heck they're going to do it. And it's been very quiet. So we're hoping that there'll be a little bit more flexibility when it rolls out, because some of that didn't make sense. But we looked at the worst case scenario and we wrote our grant that way. But we're hoping some of that will change. But again, none of this money replaces the obligation under 166.
Let's say you had a mixed classroom of 4-year-olds, and some of them fell under the 200% poverty levels and some didn't. You would still charge tuition to the families that didn't fall under that poverty level, but they would still receive the Act
You
166.
could, depending on who you are.
Exactly. So exactly.
Yes, minus
so,
the
So
Act
the
166.
children who are 200% or below, they wouldn't be paying tuition.
Right.
The other children would be under Act 166. Those who are above income would be under Act 166. And in that particular case, it would be just like any other Act 166. They would get the tuition payment for the 10 hours, and then anything above and beyond that would be paid for by families.
And then you'd have to figure out how to pay
I think it's
Well,
good.
again-
I think it's good for everyone to learn Excel and spreadsheets if you're going to do this work.
And again, we're, the whole, that requirement to pay teachers commensurate, like that, maybe that's why I forgot it, it's interesting because that's a very difficult thing to implement in this kind of partial way. I was shocked to see it on the list. Not that I don't fully support it, I was just shocked to see it on this list, especially in a when there's an income criteria around the eligibility. So I think when that starts to suss out, I'm really hoping that prorating teacher salary, let the rising tide raise all boats and don't nickel and dime us. I'm hoping that happens. But right now they've said no. But again, that was not an immediate answer. That was they just threw, Vermont just threw us a question we can't answer. Yeah. They talked to the lawyers for 2 or 3 days before we got an answer to that question.
Because we don't fit their mold. Really, we don't. We don't fit the mold, so. Again.
But they're interested. So that's good. If you're going to be different, you might as well be interesting.
Yeah.
True.